Professor Haim Brasheet is a filmmaker, photographer, and a film studies scholar, retired from the University of East London and now teaches at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. His books include the best-selling Introduction to the Holocaust, which has been published in Turkish, Croatian, and Japanese and is being translated into other languages. His edited volumes include The Gulf War and The New World Order, The Conflict and Contemporary Visual Culture in Palestine and Israel. His films include the widely known A State of Danger on BBC, a documentary on the first Palestinian Intifada. He has also written many newspaper articles in Hebrew as well as in English. Currently, Professor Haim is one of the strong Jewish voice against the genocide in Gaza. Welcome, Professor, to Conversations with Sakina Datoo.
Thank you.
Professor, to start with, maybe just give us a bit of a background about your Jewish Israeli background.
I wasn't born in Israel. I was born in a refugee camp in Rome because both my parents were survivors of the Holocaust. They were both in Auschwitz. And when Auschwitz was terminated by the Nazis, they were moved to other camps and liberated. My father was liberated by the Americans on May the 8th, 1945. My mother was liberated by the British a couple of months earlier. They met in Torino and married there, and I was born in Rome in 1946, and we came to Israel a few weeks after it was proclaimed in June of 1948, in the middle of the war. My father refused to fight. He refused to be drafted. He said that he will not kill or be killed, and they can do with it what they like. And he was put in jail. He was, I think, if not the first, one of the first refusers of the draft in Israel. In the end, they persuaded him to be a medic, unarmed medic, and we lived after the war in an area called Jabaliyah, which is to the south of Jaffa, where the only people living there were people that, Palestinians that survived the Nakba and Jews from the camps who survived the Holocaust. It wasn't a typical Israeli habitation. The people from the Nakba and the people from the Holocaust lived together and didn't have problems with each other. Us children spoke Hebrew and Arabic. We didn't know that we shouldn't play together. Basically, it wasn't really a part of Israel. It was somewhere else in space, I suppose. And only when you went to school, you realized that you should hate the other. We even studied Arabic at school together with Hebrew, because the law then required that when there ever was an Arab minority that was substantial, you needed to study both languages. All these niceties, of course, are long gone, and we have an apartheid state that replaced Israel. There wasn't ever anything else, in a sense, but was not so fascist and right-wing that it now is.
That's very interesting to know, because I think very few people maybe realize that there used to be this coexistence between the Jews and Muslims. I think the perspective maybe a lot of us from different faiths have is that there's always been this animosity between Muslims and Jews, especially when it comes to Palestine and Israel. Do you subscribe, do you believe that the formation of the State of Israel was a good idea as long as people could coexist?
Of course not. Jews and Muslims and Christians existed in Palestine for 2,000 years. There were no pogroms, there was no Holocaust, there was no anti-Semitism, of course there was no Islamophobia. People lived there as people of the book. They lived in peace, and the only episode that broke that peace was the Crusades, when Christians killed not just Muslims and Jews, but also the Christians of Jerusalem, because they were defiled by living with the unbelievers. So I think this history is not just in Palestine, though importantly it is in Palestine also, but of course in Al-Andalus, in Spain, 800 years of Muslim rule were typified by a convivencia, living together, very close living together, not just living together but in tension. No, it was a very intimate relationship. For example, Muslim and Jewish scholars would write in each other's language, but also, and I think that is really very intimate, would write Arabic in Hebrew characters and Hebrew in Arabic characters. Maimonides, for example, wrote a lot of his work this way. This was a sign of the intimacy between the two communities. This is true about the Balkans. This is true about the Ottoman Empire. This is true even about India under the Mughals. It is true about all the Arab countries where Jews lived without fear for their life and in as close to equality as the period allowed. So actually Zionism is a very brief and a very disturbing episode in the life of Jews, Christians and Muslims together that lasted for so long. Jews were hounded in Europe. They were not hounded in the Arab and Muslim world. So anyone that tells you that there is a history of hate between Muslims and Jews is lying, or they don't know the history.
Now, Professor, when we talk about these interfaith relations, especially in Britain, and especially now with the climate being what it is, what is your opinion in terms of these interfaith? Because, speaking earlier to Professor David Miller, he was saying all the interfaith that is being organized in the UK is sponsored by Zionists. But there has to be some form of us coming together and being able to replicate the golden times that you're talking about. How can we do that?
I think David Miller is correct. Anything that is called interfaith dialogue is actually set up under false pretenses. We have set it up. A Jewish organization, a Muslim organization, and a Christian organization has set up a movement called the Convivencia Alliance. And we are definitely not supported by Zionism or by the Israelis. And our calculation is that the necessity of convivencia is not just important in Palestine, which it always was. We can go back to that because this is a very important history of Palestine. But it's very important in Britain. In Britain, Islamophobia is on the rise, and very, very fast rise. The legislation that Michael Gove is now forwarding is definitely Islamophobic. So I think what we want is also to apply the same philosophy of convivencia to Britain and, mind you, to Europe, where Islamophobia is also very worrying, especially in Central Europe and the post-communist societies where even not just Islamophobia, even anti-Semitism is on the rise. So we must have a machinery of speaking to each other. And for example, we have been invited to a number of mosques, but not to any synagogue yet, and not to any church. So Muslims want to hear us. We go there, a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim, and we speak in the same language, and we're brothers.
Now, you obviously don't mince your words when it comes to speaking out against Zionism. There must have been some repercussion. There must have been some kind of, challenges that you have faced from your Jewish communities. Have you?
I think most of the damage to people like me comes directly from the State of Israel, through its different organs, embassies, the foreign ministry, and so on. Two jobs that I have been offered and signed a contract for were withdrawn under action from the Israeli state. But of course, there is now a lot of hatred towards people like me because we are seen as traitors by the organized Jewish communities. Those communities should be really ashamed of supporting genocide. How can Jews support genocide? You know, my parents were the only survivors of the family. How could I even think of supporting genocide? You know, so I don't understand how these Jews look at themselves in the mirror. But they are threatening people like me and our organization, which is the Jewish Network for Palestine, continuously sending us mails, sending us different, telephoning, threatening us every day. So, yeah, there are some people who prefer hate to peace and justice.
And this, Professor, is happening, I think, in different communities. We know that Muslim scholars have also been threatened, being threatened even with police cases where there isn't anything that they've said is wrong. And with the extremist law that is, being talked about, do you fear that the speech can be curtailed, that we may go backwards after having been, speaking out so much in this country?
I'm sure speech can and is being curtailed, and it has been curtailed before in different societies and different cultures. We know that there are instances where people are not allowed to say the truth. This happened in the 1950s and late 40s in the United States. My good friend, Dr. Radha Karmi, has been invited to the police because she spoke about Hamas in a public meeting. She is not a supporter of Hamas necessarily, but she said that it's an organization of resistance. If we're not allowed to say things which are facts, that is basically silencing democratic debate.
Now, the Zionist lobby, I mean, one of the main reasons we see a lot of support for Israel is that it's a very strong Zionist lobby. What can we learn, as an anti-Zionist lobby? How do we learn to make sure that our voices are also heard, that we are able to penetrate all these spheres?
The Zionist lobby is a very rich body. It is financed both from Israel and from local rich people that are, acting for Israel. So I think it would be good if Muslims in this country have supported the Palestinians in a similar manner, to set up research and public debate institutions that can take up the fight to Israeli Hasbara. Israeli Hasbara is a series of lies from beginning to end. You can see how they lied every inch of the road since the 7th of October. Everything that they said was a lie, and they continue to lie. So somebody has got to tell the truth when the BBC and even The Guardian are not telling us the truth, and not showing us the suffering of Palestinians either in Gaza or in other parts of Palestine. Al Jazeera is doing a very important work, and some of the other smaller channels and online channels as well. But it's not possible to act in government and in parliament when there isn't a strong organization that tells, for example, the members of parliament and the House of Lords the reality. They hear the voice of Israel. They hear the lobby coming to support Israel. They don't hear a Muslim lobby. This is terrible.
And I mean, a lot of Muslim countries we know are hugely compromised when it comes to this issue. Where would you be looking for this kind of support or financial backing? Do we have enough resources, do you think, individually, people in the UK or in the West, who can support such an initiative?
I think that, millions have gone into the streets, most, in some cases, Muslim families, where the whole family is out to support Palestine. I think these resources should be used. Also, there are countries in the Arab world, like Qatar, that are supporting the Palestinians to a certain extent, and they could be tapped for support of such an organization. But also citizens of Britain. You don't need to be a Muslim to be against Islamophobia.
Yeah.
We all should be against Islamophobia. I'm, for example, fasting because I want to feel together with Muslims now. Wow. So I'm a Jew, not a religious Jew, but I'm fasting this Ramadan because I want to be with the people of Gaza. And this is one small way I can do so. Many people in Britain will support a voice for the truth on this issue, I'm sure. They don't need to be Muslim.
And this is the issue, I think, that a lot of people think that pro-Palestinians are mostly Muslims. I mean, you just have to look at the demonstrations in London to realize that this is multi-faith, multilingual, there's all sorts of people who support.
It's the people of London.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when it comes to us really showing our dissatisfaction with the government, there are elections coming up, later this year. There's a lot of debate of whether we should, boycott both the parties, Conservatives and the Labour. And yet there is others, and I've heard this even within the Muslim communities, saying that if we, for example, did not vote for Labour, this would ensure that we're giving space to Conservatives to come back in. What would be your advice? How would you advise people to vote?
I think that people should look at the conditions in each constituency. For example, the constituency in Rochdale has done something very interesting. So this can be done in other places. And the more we can remove from the Tories and Labour of Keir Starmer, the better. I mean, at the moment, I'm not able to give specific advice, but I want to say that we need to find candidates that will speak for the truth and will speak for democracy and will speak for freedom of speech. Otherwise, we will lose all of those. And at the moment, the two parties, the opposition and the government, are both trying to silence us. So I know that you don't want the Tories because of all the legislation and repression that they are pushing. But I'm not sure that Labour will be much better. I was a member of Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, and seeing the treatment that he had after Keir Starmer came to power in Labour, I left the party quite publicly in a letter published online because I couldn't actually take the stories of fake anti-Semitism that they have been pushing. Like me, a lot of left-wing Jews, socialist Jews supporting Palestine, left the party or were kicked out of it. So Labour is not something that we should support come what may. It depends on their policies. If they are not left-wing, if they are not helping the people of Britain, and definitely if they are helping to kill the people of Palestine, I don't suggest to people to vote for them.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's really inspiring because I know even within the Muslim communities, there are people who are still not sure, who are debating within themselves, whether we should stick to Labour. There's a lot of fear. And then we see people like you, and you're really an inspiration. And thank you for all that you do to speak out for Palestinians and against Islamophobia. And thank you all for watching. If you can, please do subscribe to my channel, where I hope to bring you further enlightening interviews. Goodbye.